Hello, Josh Sideris here. The other day at the International Astronautical Congress in Australia, SpaceX founder Elon Musk laid out his revised plans for colonizing the red planet with his new BFR rocket. And this created a lot of excitement within the space enthusiast community. So this is a video I've wanted to do for a while now, but I think now is the right time to do it. The question is whether or not Bitcoin will work on Mars. After all, if we're going to be building cities on Mars, we're going to need money, and cryptocurrencies seem like a logical option. There are a few benefits to having a unified currency between Earth and Mars. For one, it prevents there from being a trade deficit. If you don't know what a trade deficit is, consider the example between the United States and China. Let's say I'm the United States and you're China, and I'm buying things from you, just as the US does, and I'm paying you in US dollars. Now, you have no use for those US dollars. You can buy stuff from me, but I'm not really exporting as much as you are. So eventually you're going to have a lot of US dollars stack up. So what that basically means is that I owe you, right? Because I bought a lot of stuff from you, and now you have these useless dollars that you can use to buy stuff from me. So I owe you stuff, right? And until I start producing and selling stuff, you can't really get that value back. Now, ultimately, what has to happen in order for the trade deficit to balance out is I either have to start selling you stuff, or I can stop buying as many things from you. Now, typically this is going to work out on its own, because if I am buying a lot of stuff from you, then that means that a lot of US dollars are going from me to you. So that means that the US dollar becomes more valuable to me. It becomes more expensive. So it's more and more difficult for me to continue buying stuff from you. And the opposite is true for you. For you, the US dollar becomes less and less valuable because you have so much of it. You want to get rid of it. So eventually, the risk with a trade deficit is that one day, like let's say that everyone in China decides, oh, I'm just gonna get rid of all my US dollars because they're worthless, and they sell them at the current exchange rate. All of a sudden, that creates a spike in inflation. Having a trade deficit isn't always a bad thing. Like, it allows you to import more than you export short term. There's also a risk if you have one unified currency. It stabilizes your economy overall over the long term, whereas if you had multiple currencies competing with each other, you're going to get things like trade deficits, you're going to get smaller currencies collapsing. So this turns your economy into a roller coaster. But the problem is, when you have one big unified currency, when a collapse does happen, it's usually a lot more dramatic. Bitcoin sidesteps a lot of the problems with government-printed currencies and centralized banks, as you know, but one of the biggest threats to Bitcoin is that people just stop using it or start using a different cryptocurrency instead, and then anyone who owns Bitcoin will lose value. Let's get into a little bit of review on how Bitcoin works. I'm going to give this as a high-level overview and talk about the conceptual essentials required to understand the problem. As you know, Bitcoin relies on a technology called the blockchain, where every transaction that occurs adds a new link to the chain. The blockchain is essential to Bitcoin's function. It allows anyone at any time to verify who has what money within the decentralized network by checking the entire history of transactions to verify that the person sending you some Bitcoins actually owns the Bitcoins that they're sending, and that you actually receive the Bitcoins that you were sent, and that they are not counterfeits. Bitcoin is also decentralized. That means that there's no central authority as to which transactions are valid and which transactions are invalid. That's all handled algorithmically by the Bitcoin protocol. Now let's say that somebody tried to send the same Bitcoin twice. Well, that's obviously not allowed, and that would create a counterfeit Bitcoin. But luckily, the Bitcoin algorithm is quite robust, and that is handled. The way that it works is that if you try to spend the same Bitcoin twice, that's called double spending, and each computer within the Bitcoin network must choose which branch within the blockchain is the correct branch. The rule here is to choose the longest branch. I actually don't know what happens if the two branches are exactly the same length. I guess at that point it's just arbitrary. But this is a problem, because what it means is that you can receive a Bitcoin from someone and look at the blockchain to verify that that Bitcoin was sent to you, but then later that entire branch could be deleted from the blockchain. So this can actually be used to reverse transactions. I should emphasize that these things don't just happen on their own. This would specifically be a type of attack. So it constitutes as fraud. So if you knew who you were trying to receive Bitcoins from, you could call the police and accuse this person of defrauding you. It's very hard to do this in practice because you're basically competing against all the other computers in the network to verify your alternate transaction opposed to your current transaction. So you need a lot of computing power. And another thing is that someone who's being scammed will find out that they were scammed within a few minutes. Now let's say that you were trying to spend some Bitcoins on Mars. Well, all the computers on Mars might agree that that transaction happened, but that branch is going to be orphaned until it is propagated throughout the network on Earth. But let's say that I tried to send the same Bitcoins on Earth and on Mars. And let's say that on Earth, I'm sending the Bitcoin to one of my wallets, whereas on Mars, I'm sending it to someone who I am trying to buy something from. Earth and Mars are separated by a great deal of space, and it takes time for light to get transmitted between Earth and Mars. So what will happen is that the Earth transaction will be validated on Earth, and the Mars transaction will be validated on Mars. However, because the computers on Earth can probably out-hash the computers on Mars, the Mars transaction will end up getting reversed. So this could be used to scam someone by using a double spend attack, and they won't find out for at least 40 minutes, which is how long it would take to verify a transaction on Mars with the Earth network, just because of the radio delay between Earth and Mars. And every 26 months, when Mars hides behind the sun, radio transmission is disrupted for even longer. You know, even if nobody scams anyone, the fact that there's such a long delay to get your transaction verified on Mars is a pretty big problem. What about Bitcoin mining? Well, if you're mining Bitcoins on Mars, then you're going to be getting data from Earth, verifying it, and sending it back. But on average, it takes a computer about 10 minutes to add a block to the chain. But like I said, the radio transit time to send that signal back to Earth can be as much as 24 minutes. And so what that means is that by the time you finally transmit that data back to Earth, it's already been verified by someone else, and now your block is stale. So, you mine Bitcoins by verifying transactions. That's the way it works. So you're spending all this electricity to verify transactions that have already been verified. So you're spending time on stale transactions, so you're losing money. So nobody's going to want to mine Bitcoins. None of this means that the people on Mars aren't going to be able to own Bitcoins. They will be able to own Bitcoins. It's just unlikely that Bitcoins are viable as a form of currency on Mars. So the future of Bitcoin might have the entire network centered on Earth, and then if you want to buy Bitcoins, well then that transaction is all stored on Earth, and you would trade something else, maybe like a local Mars coin or something like that, in exchange for Bitcoins. There is a risk though. If the computing power on Mars ever became comparable to the computing power on Earth, it could actually disrupt Bitcoin. It would take a lot of investment to set this up, but in theory, the same thing that makes Bitcoin an unviable currency to be using on Mars could be used to disrupt its viability on Earth by overwhelming the blockchain on Earth, creating a whole whackload of stale blocks. So in the future, Mars could hypothetically hijack Bitcoin and make it virtually worthless for the people on Earth. I'm not sure why they would do that though, because it would take a lot of effort to set that up, and it could lead to the collapse of Bitcoin, meaning that all of your efforts will be in vain, unless that was your intention to begin with. But even then, there might be ways to mitigate this problem by just increasing the length of the block interval, which is the amount of time it takes to add a new block to the chain, which I mentioned is currently 10 minutes. But yeah, I don't know what the future of Bitcoin will be, but it should be interesting to see. But I don't see Bitcoin working as a currency on Mars. But luckily, the technology is easy to adapt, so I'm sure cryptos will have a bright future, and Mars will just have to have its own cryptocurrency. Well, until next time, thanks for watching and subscribe for more. Josh Sideris.